So on the 13th of May, Logic Pro 11 was finally released. And with it comes some brand new features, and these include the stem splitting function. It's just like most other stem splitting software, it was split generally into drums, bass, vocals, and other. They've also introduced this bass session player and the piano session player too, which are pretty much just the same as drummer, but now work with bass guitar and piano as well. And the one thing that I wanted to go through today is to talk about the new distortion plugin, Chromaglow. This is the part that I'm probably most excited for because Logic has been missing a good quality distortion saturation plugin. Really, they just had the distortion plugin, Distortion 2, and all the other ones in that category, which weren't great. The one thing that's kind of annoyed me about the update though is that they've still not introduced, from what I can tell anyway, a scale highlight feature, which is kind of unbelievable to be honest. Ableton, FL, Studio One, they all have a scale highlight, which just makes programming notes so much easier. And at this rate, it seems like Pro Tools is probably going to get a scale highlight feature before Logic does. There are ways around this, of course. You can drag in loads of notes and use the scale quantize and then hide all the notes, but it's just a pain. Please, Logic, add this to the next update. And on the surface level, there aren't any major changes outside of that, apart from they've changed some icons and little things like this here and there. And as time goes on, we'll find out more and I'll update you on more of these features. But as I said, the main thing I want to focus on today is the Chromaglow plugin. And to read from the actual Apple website, Chromaglow models the sounds produced by a blend of the world's most revered studio hardware by leveraging AI and the power of the M series Apple Silicon. And it does seem a lot more refined than just your standard distortion unit. So let's jump in and have a look. So it's inside the distortion category, our Chromaglow. Top left, we've got our model. 5 different types of model, from these tube models at the top, magnetic, squeeze, analog preamp. And these are generally the 5 different types of saturation or distortion you'll find in most other plugins. And each model has its own style as well, generally clean or colorful, apart from the squeeze mode. It's got the big drive dial in the middle here, which is nice because it has the auto gain compensation, which is always very useful. Essentially, this is going to bring the input up and the output down at the same time, so you don't get a massive change in volume. There's a very, very useful feature up in the top here, this bypass below option, which allows you to ignore parts of the frequency spectrum below that set frequency, meaning that you can distort the upper frequencies and not the low frequencies. You've got level in and level out, which are always very useful to have in these types of plugins, just in case you need a little bit of extra drive. And then we've also got a mix dial too, which is good as well. In the bottom, we have 2 filters, a low cut and a high cut. These can be set to pre and post. So pre just means the filter's applied before the distortion, and post means it's afterwards. And you've got your usual controls on here: slope, frequency, and resonance. Now overall, the features inside of here aren't very extensive. When you look at the other competitors like Saturn II, Trash, and Rift, they all have a lot more extensive modulation parameters. They'll have LFOs, envelopes, different filter types. But that being said, I don't think Chromaglow is meant to be similar to those. I think it's meant to be a lot more closer to Decapitator by Sound Toys. And it's modeled off studio hardware, so it's mainly more focusing on the actual sound that it creates. But let's have a look at what it does. And I've got a setup here where I've got a serum that's just running a plain sine wave. On the bottom left-hand corner, we've got a frequency spectrum. It's playing the note of 8, so we can see our harmonics in here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And then I've also got an oscilloscope in the bottom right-hand corner there, just so you can see how the waveform's changing too when we start to introduce this. So let's turn it back on. Now, just because the volume of my serum is quite loud, you can see it's already starting to do something on the frequency spectrum here. Adding in these extra harmonics, and we're on the modern tube setting at the moment. Let's just turn the drive up. And there's a really nice wide range of tones that are created by this distortion. If you look in the bottom right hand corner, you'll also see how the waveform changes. You can kind of get to this point where we're quite close to a square wave. We've got a little notch halfway up and down the waveform. And you can see at that point, So it's not just a simple regular soft clipper or distortion plugin, there's a lot more processing going on. So we turn the drive up, I'm going to turn the style from clean to colourful. Now you do have this kind of slight lag, as you can hear when you change between the different styles. It's also the same for the drive as well. Now, I reckon this has just been done to smooth out any pops or clicks that would come when you start to change the drive. But just be careful if you're looking to automate any of these, they might have a little bit of a delay. You can see that they're very similar. The colourful mode just has a few more upper harmonics. Let's try out the retro tube. And overall, they both do have that nice tube sound to them. I don't know what studio units they've actually based these different modes on, but they do sound a lot like tube distortion generally. Let's look at the third one then. We've got magnetic. And I can imagine that magnetic is probably going to be tape. It does have those similar qualities. Generally, a big difference between the magnetic and the tube options will be the harmonics that are created. Normally, the magnetic or the tape saturation or distortion will tend to create more odd numbered harmonics. You see the second harmonic here is a little bit higher on that retro tube there. I don't really know what all this stuff is in the background here. It kind of looks like it's what the waveform should look like once it's been processed, but then we move on to squeeze. Now squeeze does change. You can see we don't have a drive control, it's called squeeze now. And the style at the top isn't clean or colourful, it's soft press and hard press. And it seems like when we look at an example on some drums in a little bit, it has some kind of transient shaping or compression or something involved in this process because it adds a lot of extra punch to anything that you put through it. But in this instance, you're probably not going to be able to hear that. And this squeeze is a lot more closer to like a regular distortion. As you can see on the waveform, we've got a relatively clean looking square wave from our sine wave there. So it's a lot cleaner than the other three at the top. And then finally, the analog preamp. Now this has a lot more of those even harmonics. It's probably like the warmest. It doesn't squash the dynamics as much as the other top three models will do. But again, you've got clean and colourful. It all sounds really nice. Looking at the bypass below, let's just turn this on. I'm going to turn the drive up. Let's go back to modern tube and I'm going to turn the bypass below on. Now it doesn't make too much sense with this sine wave here because it is ignoring all the frequencies below this frequency here, but the sine wave, the original sine wave, doesn't really have many frequencies above that, so it doesn't make a big difference, but you can still hear there is a change going on when we move this up and down. Now the thing about this, the way in which it seems like it's working, but I'm not exactly sure, is before the drive is applied, there is a low cut being applied to the signal, and then that low cut is removing all of the low frequencies, it distorts all the frequencies that remain, and then it's blended back in with the original signal. But it actually kind of sounds a bit more like there's maybe a crossover, like a multi-band situation, but the lower band isn't being distorted. But I'm not exactly sure, there might be another way that this is being done. You can get a similar effect if we come down to the filters. We turn on the low cut. I'm going to remove all the frequencies below 200 Hertz like this on pre, and then I'd use the mix in the top right to blend this back in. you get a similar effect. But as we'll show on the drums and the bass in a bit, this still causes phase issues when you do turn this on, but it's not as bad as using that low cut method. So it is doing something a lot better than just doing this. As I said before, we've got the level in and the level out, and these are both very important, not just for increasing the volume going into the plugin, but also matching the volume coming out. One of the big things about distortion and compression is you can end up being tricked by the plugin. As I said before, Chromaglow here has a good auto gain feature built in, but when you increase that drive and the volume increases, your brain will generally think that it sounds better because it's louder, even though it might not necessarily actually sound better than before the plugin was applied. Again, going on to the filters, pretty simple what these are. Low cut on, high cut on. And again, with the filters, it'd be really nice just to have some extra filter types in here, not just a low cut or a high cut. You could put a range of different filters in there, and a very common one to use in a plugin like this, a notch filter or a peak filter in to add some phase in, some movement into the sound. But again, I don't think the overall focus of this plugin was to cater to the very extreme sound design process. It's more to give your tracks an extra little bit of life and character. So let's look at it being used in some examples. Here I've got a TR-909 drum kit loop with no processing on. And this is the waveform of the loop in the bottom right hand corner here, as you can see. The only things that have changed, I did tighten up the toms a little bit just by shortening the envelope inside the Drum Machine Designer, but there's no other processing on this to show you how powerful this plugin can be. So let's load in Chromaglow now onto our channel. Let's just have a play around. Let's start with the retro tube. Change to colourful. And you can hear it just has that really nice tone, especially when the kick drum hits on most of the distortions. That would immediately start to create a lot of very, very high frequencies. But in this, similar to like a tube distortion would, it has that nice, warm, natural feeling that it did before. Let's just try out this bypass below now we're in here. So I'll turn this on. I'm going to bring it all the way down to begin with and slowly bring it up. And you'll hear straight away that's that phase shift that I was talking about before is going to have an impact on the phase of your track. So just be a little bit careful with this. And you'll hear as I slowly start to bring it up, the kick drum will start to separate into two different parts. But you can hear here, for example, the low sub of the kick drum is still nice and clean, and we're just distorting the kind of low mid punch of the kick, the clap, and all the hi-hats above. And just to show you as well, if we replicated this with the low cut, I'm not exactly sure what the slope is. Let's go for a 12 just to be a bit fairer on the bypass there. So low cut, bring the mix to about 50%. And then let's try the bypass. It is a much cleaner way of ignoring those low frequencies than using the low cut. So it is still working quite well. Let's go on to the modern tube then. And you can hear it's a little bit more aggressive. There are a lot more upper harmonics. But again, the distortion it creates is just so nice. It has so much character. And if I just go into, for example, if we just go into distortion, Turn Chromaglow off. I'm just going to set this to like clean. You can hear there's quite a dramatic difference between this distortion and that Chromaglow. You can see on the waveform as well. It's just squaring everything off in a very digital way. And what I want to do as well is I'm going to compare it to some of the other ones that I have out there, like Saturn II, for example. And I'm just going to jump back and forth between the two here. I'll try and set them up in a similar way. If we go for, let's go for magnetic. And we'll keep this on clean tape as well. And what I might do is set the drive to 0 on both and then increase the level. They do have a very, very similar tone, especially on this magnetic type as well. If we go over into Decapitator, which is again another one that is very similar. I can't remember which mode is which inside of here, but let's just add some drive. And that sounds a lot more like a tube actually. Let's try. Again, it's really, really close. It is getting very, very similar results to Decapitator. Considering, of course, this is a paid plugin, Saturn II is a paid plugin, and Chromaglow just comes free with Logic. Let's keep going through that because we've done tube, we did modern tube. Let's turn on to magnetic again just to listen to this. And you can hear there's such a wide range of tones you can get in this. Let's turn the level up a bit more as well. And again, just as a reminder, this is what it sounded like before. No mixing, no processing or anything like that. Let's move on to squeeze then. And this is the one I was talking about before. Again, I don't know exactly what's going on with this squeeze model, but there's some kind of transient shaping, maybe a bit of compression in there, because you'll see with all the other ones, if you look at the waveform, and this is what saturation and distortion will generally do, is it'll remove any kind of very loud peaks from your audio. We turn this off. You see the kick drum there has that spike. The beginning of the 909 kick drum. And when we turn this on, you can see it disappears, and it'll do the same for all the other sounds. It'll squash them. But when we go into squeeze, that peak is still there, and it adds some extra transients to our other hits in between as well. And when it's at these lower settings, look how much you get. Now, personally, I'm not 100% sure on what I feel about this model, especially on drums like this. With it increasing this peak, it's going to increase the volume. If you look down here in our Logic meter, if I turn the plugin off, we're getting a volume of minus 10.5. And when we turn it on, we're increasing the volume of our track by 9 decibels. If we go into one of the other types, for example, the volume is minus 10 when we've got it turned on. It's minus 10.5 when we've got it turned off. So we've only increased the volume, the peak volume, by 0.5 decibels, but you can hear the perceived volume has increased dramatically. Going back onto squeeze, if we change over to hard, you can kind of hear there's something going on with the hi-hats there, where there's some kind of compression or expansion. I'm not exactly sure. So these are okay. Maybe you would use this on an individual drum hit rather than the whole drum group like we're doing here. Maybe you just put this onto a kick drum that you want to sound punchier. That might work quite well. But eventually you will have to then clip or limit that peak back down. And just to show you what I mean, if I go back to soft, to correctly balance the volumes, turn the plugin off. The volume before is minus 10.5, turn it on. It's minus 1.5, so we just work out the difference, which is minus 9 decibels. On the level out, we type in minus 9. So these are now the same peak volume. You can hear it does sound quite nice when you've balanced those volumes out, but just be careful because the volume does increase a lot when using this. If we change over to one of the other types, we don't really have to balance the volume too much thanks to the drive. If anything, we actually now need to increase the volume by 1.3 decibels to get it back up to where it was before. Obviously, this is a very extreme setting though. And then finally, the analog preamp. This one has a strange effect where it doesn't squash the dynamics of your signal as much as the other types would do. So and the other thing to point out about the colourful one here is there's definitely some form of asymmetrical distortion going on. The top half of the wave is a little bit smaller now than the bottom half of the wave compared to the clean. There's either some asymmetrical distortion, maybe some biasing is taking place there. That result of the asymmetrical distortion are those even harmonics, that kind of wobbly effect. The other big thing you can probably hear is that it has some kind of filtering going on, even at zero drive. A lot of those high frequencies are being reduced quite dramatically. So this is something you'd maybe put onto an instrument that you're recording into Logic, like electric guitar, potentially even a vocal if you want a warmer feel, but it's quite a dramatic high frequency cut. Could be useful if you're going for like a lo-fi type of feel. So let's just look at a few bass examples just so you can see how it works on those. So I've got a bass made in FM8 here. Let's put Chromaglow on there again. There's so many different tones you can get from this. It's a really, really useful plugin. The one thing I did notice though, which is a little bit odd, and I don't know if this is just based on how the plugin actually works. When on the magnetic clean setting, with the drive turned up, let me just turn the input level up a bit more as well. There are some really, really quiet, high-pitched frequencies that seem to be created by this plugin. And you can see they don't happen all the time. Right there, some kind of harmonics that are just being brought in. Now maybe this is just me not knowing about some of these old studio hardware units, but it's not very useful to have this in your track though, because you never know how loud these frequencies could eventually get, and they'll start to mess with other processes further down the chain when it comes to mastering as well. I don't know if that's a problem, if that's a bug, or if it's character. Maybe a little bit too much character for me. And it's also a bit strange how it happens only every now and again. It's like the model changes as time goes on. If you know what this is, then put it in the comments below. I'd love to know exactly why it's doing this. I can only really hear it though when you've got the drive set to these very high settings, but it's just something to be aware of. And then finally, let's just look at this Reese bass. This is what it sounds like before. Here's a diva patch. We've got some filtering going on, some bandpass. We've got a phaser and a chorus just to add a lot of movement. And then we're going to add Chromaglow afterwards. Again, if you listen very closely on that bass, you can hear those very high frequencies. Again, who knows, that could be a bug, maybe not. And for me, this is the best thing about the Logic Pro 11 update. Logic seemed to be on the right path in terms of adding the new plugins. Last time they added in the Sample Alchemy plugin, which is a great granular synth, and now they've added in this. This to me is a great plugin. As we showed before, it holds up just as well with Saturn 2 and Decapitate, which are two of the top best plugins out there for saturation and distortions. And of course, we've mainly used this on electronic examples here, but I can imagine it works just as well for any recordings, acoustic instruments, and vocals too. And overall, the Logic Pro 11 update seems okay. I personally don't use any of the session player instruments, so they're not a big plus to me. The stem splitting is really good though, because it's obviously free if you own Logic, and this Chromaglow plugin, I think it's one of the best plugins that they've made in quite a while. So thanks for watching this tutorial. Leave a comment below of what you think of the new Logic update. And let me know if I've got something slightly wrong in terms of this plugin. It did only come out around 12 hours ago, but from what I can tell, it's a really good plugin. If you can, drop a like on the video and subscribe. We're going to have a lot more content like this coming out soon, and make sure to check out our track analysis series as well. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.